Welcome to Healthcare Matters, bringing you the latest insights and innovations shaping the future of healthcare. This episode is brought to you by Arab Health in partnership with M42. My name is Peter Birch, and today we're covering AI's role in advancing healthcare innovation, data-driven medicine, genomics, and strategic partnerships. Joining me today is Dr. Maaz Shaikh, Vice President for Product Management at M42. Dr. Maaz, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Peter. Lovely to be here.
It's great to see you. I'm really looking forward to understanding a little bit more about your insights and particularly the vision in relation to AI when it comes to healthcare and what M42 is doing. Help us understand it a little bit more, particularly for M42, the work you're doing with artificial intelligence development in healthcare. How's it unique? What's setting you apart?
So, Peter, you would know that technology and AI have been evolving and get adopted in different industries very rapidly. Healthcare as a sector is known for the long amount of time, the lag it takes before it can adopt and internalize technology. One of the reasons behind that is while it's easy to build technology learning from different industries, the unique thing about healthcare is it takes awfully long. It's a very capital, time, and labor intensive process to get your first set of clinical users. That's exactly where it sets M42 apart. At M42, on one side, we've got access to our globally competitive tech talent and infrastructure and computing resources. But on the flip side, on the other side, we've got access to thousands of clinicians, facilities, and their patients across the globe. That's the unique positioning M42 has.
Yeah, look, I mean, to be able to have, access to that ecosystem of clinicians, so doctors and nurses and those professionals, it's unique. Tell me more about, I guess, the advantage of that. Like, what does that bring?
So, Peter, being part of the ecosystem not only allows us to get like a front seat view to the clinical, operational, financial dimensions of building technology and AI solutions in healthcare. It kind of also helps us participate, bring the clinicians, the nurses, the doctors in the loop of problem solving, get their feedback, co-create with them, and be able to kind of deploy these solutions at scale and test them in real world settings at scales which would not be possible outside or would take awfully long amounts of time. That's the clear advantage that we have. As an example, for all the solutions that we've built in the last 1 year and products that we've envisioned from them, we've been able to kind of bring clinicians, doctors, nurses, administrators, coders into the loop of providing feedback. And it's essentially that feedback that an input that kind of helps us build solutions that are desirable, for the end users, they're feasible to implement and extract value, and also viable for us to kind of build because we're not spending and wasting a lot of effort trying to build things that are not required.
Yeah. Well, look, we often do talk about the importance of co-design with clinicians when it comes to healthcare innovation generally. I imagine within, the realm of artificial intelligence, that would be no exception too. Are there any particular examples you can provide? Like what areas of AI is that really useful having the clinicians involved? Because I would have thought, maybe it's you need the techie coders and the ones that are doing the algorithms and things. Like, is there a particular example you can help me understand it with?
Sure, Peter. Let me talk to you about with an example from the clinical large language model work that we've been doing. So, about in mid of 2023, we built a large language model called Met42. It was one of the world's most performant clinical large language models to be released. We trained it on large volumes of data, and then we evaluated on standardized questionnaires like the USMLE test scale and scored 72 percentile, more than any other open or close open source model at that point of time. But that's the model. Now, when we actually take the model and deploy it in different use cases, we work with clinicians to identify what of the capabilities of a large language model would they like to use, and then map those to problems they already had. So, for example, working with the clinicians, we realize one of the key pain points that they have, they spend awful amount of time trying to summarize information from long drawn medical records, right? Now, if you could apply that capability of large language model, which it's brilliant at, right? Take that and apply it to this problem, and you have a solution that is very valuable to the user. So we took that as a pain point. We built a AI assistant that could connect to an EMR, extract the relevant information, summarize it, and provide different views to different doctors and clinicians based on their roles. That was a good validation, bringing the clinician in the loop to validate the requirement. The next level that we actually took this thing to is bringing the physician to evaluate the solution, right? We did a very structured evaluation where we generated responses from Met42, and we asked clinicians to evaluate them for completeness and accuracy. Since they know the data, they know the information, they know the evidence, they were able to kind of evaluate it and provide us a rating and on how complete is the response, how accurate do they find it, and also how acceptable. Because on a spectrum of completeness and accuracy, you can keep pushing for performance, but there's a acceptable level of performance with which they can work with the understanding that the systems that we are building are not for empowering them. They are there to assist the clinician to do their task and not to do the task on their behalf, right? So with that perspective, we got amazing feedback, and that adds to two things: a understanding when do you have a solution that's ready to be deployed at scale, and is it safe enough, and b, we identify what are the next important problems that you need to kind of focus on and solve going forward. This was an example of taking the model and taking it to use. But not just this, we also involve the clinicians in training the model. So you remember I mentioned about training Met40 to the clinical large language model. It was trained with a very large set of clinical data set that was curated at M42. We involved a group of doctors and clinicians in the curation process itself. And it's essentially that feedback that we brought in to the mix that kind of helped us curate a very strong, validated set of question answer format pairs that allowed us to train this data and kind of train the model, and align it to the roles that we wanted it to ascribe, essentially being a medical assistant.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I can think of plenty of examples where I guess technology has failed clinicians, in the ecosystem, where perhaps a solution's been created and then it's kind of thrown over the fence to a clinician to say, well, what do you think of this thing now that it's built, or how can you use it? But if there was that involvement, right through the process, as you talked about, then, we're really creating solutions that address real issues. So I can see how that can add a lot of value and stand out there. I think in healthcare, though, that we have many different stakeholders that add value through the process, and we've got our the doctors and the developers and the patients as well, the most important stakeholder in the process. Do you have any thoughts on, I guess, the most important role that artificial intelligence plays to each of those particular stakeholders?
Sure. That's very interesting, and primarily because how AI would be used in healthcare would largely be influenced by the adoption with physicians. I mean, it's a very different sector. Unless it gets into the hands of physicians first, it's unlikely to be used meaningfully downstream. We can have different solutions for the patients, but at least within the healthcare ecosystem, I think clinical adoption has been primary for any health tech to be deployed in a meaningful manner in the ecosystem, right? So in that context, what I would think is, if you just zoom out and see, look at the situation at the moment. Today's doctors and for that matter, all health workers who interface with patients are incredibly busy. Asking them to do one more task would be a very, very tall ask. To the point, I would say maybe counterproductive to the efficiency, productivity, and outcomes that we're trying to drive, right? So, in the spirit of kind of having meaningful impact, I'd say that one element that AI would need to bring in is to be able to deliver an output and a task end to end completely, and remove it from the physician's basket, and do it in a way that it's operating in the background without getting in the way of the doctor-patient relationship, doctor-patient interaction, or patient care, right? So be able to do a task completely in the background and without interfering with patient care. Those are the attributes that you would need. But in order for those to be adopted, accepted, I think AI would have to be first win the trust of clinicians.
Yeah.
Because unless it wins the trust of clinicians, the doctors and the nurses, they aren't going to let it operate on its own in the background, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's one dimension, one aspect that is very important is how do we get clinicians to trust AI? What do we need from AI for clinicians to be able to trust it? Or when I say AI, I mean technology and solutions that we built around it.
Mm.
I think in that process aspect, there are a couple of things. There's a scientific dimension to it, and then there's a behavioral dimension to it, right? First, addressing the behavioral ones is generally difficult, but it's, I think, more primary to focus on. If we go in with the view that, with the clarity that AI is here to assist the clinicians, the doctors, and the nurses, and not to replace them. The purpose of building AI is to improve the quality and the efficiency, the quality, the intensity of human touch in healthcare versus take the human touch away, right? That's primary. That starts to kind of build a foundation where people are willing to talk about it now, right? Or even consider it. So the primary layer of introducing AI as the most capable advisor, assistant any clinician could ever have. And it's staying there without getting into patient care. Sorry. The second one is proving objectively through a rigorous scientific process and methodology the accuracy and the safety of AI solutions. So first, we need to prove that it's there to support them and not take the roles away. And secondly, proving that it is safe to use. So do no harm first, right? With that approach, if we can bring these two together, we could have meaningful adoption of AI, challenges that we've seen with other tech in healthcare, right? This could help us overcome that. And now that you've been able to empower the clinicians with a tool, a solution that they trust and free up their time, that is the time when you can actually envision them being able to use health tech AI and other things for bigger things in healthcare, right? That's when we can ask them to do newer tasks or kind of bring in newer improvements in their workflows and the kind of care that they deliver. That's for the patient. That's for the doctor. And I would say that applies from the patient's perspective as well. So unless there is clinician endorsement of any technology, it wouldn't be taken seriously at the patient end. It's about the same as Googling information otherwise, right? It's about finding information on the internet. It's about finding information. How does it differentiate from being clinically safe is the question, right? So we need a specific way of winning the clinician's trust first that then permeates its way down to the patients, and it can be endorsed and enforced by the clinicians as well. I think in this entire equation, the developers need to kind of prioritize those two elements of clinical safety over other things that generally would apply in other sectors of industry. And that's a very different paradigm you always look at when you talk about technology and healthcare together.
Yeah, it's unique in healthcare, isn't it? That respecting that clinician-patient relationship and the role that I guess both stakeholders play, but in particular the burden of trust that's on the clinician, that they're providing the right advice and care, and so they need to, in turn, as you say, have the trust in the tools they're using, be it in artificial intelligence or other kind of innovation. And there's something different in healthcare too about the amount of I guess personal accountability sometimes that the clinician takes. So if they can't trust the tool, then it's obvious they're not going to do that. And I like as well too that you pointed out that we don't just want to trade off one set of problems for another. There's no point in implementing an AI solution that's maybe nearly as good as what we were doing before, or roughly about the same. Otherwise, there's no point switching it out. You're just having some other problems. So how do we kind of level up that efficiency or capability, or all of those? So it's great to hear those types of thinking are kind of front of mind for you right now. I'd love to learn, like, as a like particular example, because I know the breadth of healthcare that M42 covers in relation to particular modalities of care. Love to hear from you about, I guess, the current use cases of artificial intelligence that M42's deployed that are really kind of adding value in that clinical setting.
So, Peter, I'd love to talk to you about how we took Met42, the clinical large language model, and applied it to two different contexts of settings. So, first we said, how can we take Met42 and apply it to making our physicians and clinicians uh, work efficiently, work better, right? Uh, and when we looked at the solutions, that pain points that they had, we realized clinical documentation takes a lot of time away from patients. I mean, takes the clinician's time away from patients there,
Yeah.
right? And if we can give them that time back and they can invest that in patient care, we would we would have far more happier physicians, far more happier patients, as well as create the opportunity for improving the quality of care itself through use of more modern tools. So the first set of problems that we tried to adapt to was reduction in administrative workload, and we work towards building a AI powered scribe, right, which can effectively translate patient doctor interactions and dictation in multiple languages, and then uses our large language model to create highly structured, personalized, high quality chart notes and other kinds of documentation from them. Freeing up, what this essentially does is free up the clinician's time in between an interaction to be able to focus on their patients. The solution is being, as I mentioned, we take the solution, working with clinicians provides you the ability to kind of co-create, but also test and evaluate rigorously. We're taking the solution to a very scientifically rigorous evaluation. We're doing a study with our clinicians at Health Point and Maaz Health Dubai to evaluate these things in real world settings. Uh, that's one work stream. The objective here is to free up time, and then once we free up this time, we're working on a second set of tools, which is called the AI Clinical Assistant, which will enable clinicians to make better use of all the data that's generated, right? So when we saw earlier, we spoke about clinicians spending phenomenal amounts of time trying to find information. So it's actually a vicious cycle. First, they spend time creating documentation and information and putting that into the EMR, and then every time the patient comes back, they're spending time again trying to extract the same piece of information. And so you're spending so much time chasing data that you aren't able to kind of consume it, whether you're left with very little time, energy, and focus to consume it. So that's where the second set of toolkit comes in and say, can we use Met42, our large language model, to extract information from the medical records, summarize it in a way very rapidly that the clinician understands and needs at that point of time in context to that encounter, and then be able to kind of combine that with scientific evidence, guidelines, and protocols around, and be able to kind of bring that information and surface it to the clinician so that they can consume it at the point of care without having to look and go find them. Now, that's all the fee that's required for clinicians to be able to make better decisions. And then they can further go on to use this information to personalize care in formats of, for example, going beyond therapeutic care, checking for medical information on drug interactions, checking for information available if they have information around genomics, right? Patients' genomic information, as well as doing things as diverse as creating personalized meal plans and self-care plans based on multiple conditions that the patients have. If we are able to do that, we're empowering the clinicians in making scientific decisions. Uh, and the word here is empowering them, not making decisions on their behalf, using technology to bring data to a point, prep it to a point where it is consumable into insights really fast, and then be able to kind of help them use that to drive personalized care on the back of that evidence, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. We built our AI clinical assistant, which we've rolled out to an early set of users. We undergone taken it through a very rigorous evaluation to understand its capabilities in summarizing information, summarizing medical records, and we're rolling that out across our network and embedding that as components of all our digital stack.
Mm. Look, I'm glad you brought that up because I don't think we talk about that enough sometimes in healthcare. There's a lot of interest in the artificial intelligence assisted documentation for clinicians to be able to help them, I guess, take more accurate or speedy notes. And we often justify that as like so they can spend more time with a patient, which I think is super important, and that's a good goal to strive for. Often speak to clinicians, and it sometimes it is what you reflected is that just because they're not spending time doing that now, they're often being quite inefficient at doing other things further down the pipeline. So we're kind of it's good progress, but we hit the new snag, which is where you're talking around the research side or obtaining more information. There's other parts of the workflow that once we free up the clinician that side, where do we take it to next? So it's great to hear the breadth of focus that you've got there to really get to the to what we're trying to achieve here. I'd love to be able to extrapolate that further then and think about, well, where are we heading with this? And if you were to look into the evolving nature of healthcare and I guess the rapid pace of how things are going to, how do you picture what healthcare is going to look like in 5 years and or even 10 years? And what's the vision for where we're heading here from an M42 perspective?
That's a very interesting question because I'm going to give you two responses over here. The way I see healthcare, evolve over the next 5-10 years on the basis of the AI adoption that we're talking about is, on one side, it's going to become very technology centric. So we're going to be able to kind of use AI for delivering highly personalized care. But on the other side, it's also going to change the way we deliver healthcare. And I believe it's going to make healthcare more human again. It's going to bring the human touch back to healthcare, right? And the second one, the first one is going to be influenced largely and directed by being successful at the second one. So let me explain what I mean. Now, we spoke about freeing up the doctor's time and improving their efficiency, but that's secondary, I would say. The primary part there is bringing the doctor back into the encounter, bringing the doctor back to patient care, and improving the patient-doctor face time, providing them the ability, the opportunity to connect with the patients, get more face time, and be able to understand the patient at a more deeper level. That's where more information would be asked of the clinician patients. That's where more information would be captured into these intelligent systems, right? And that finds its way back into the data that we have to be able to impute and look into later when we're treating patients. So that first element of improving the quality of human touch in healthcare. That's one. Second, once we've been able to do that, it's going to dramatically change the kind of care that we deliver in terms of being able to personalize care even for common conditions because of having access to lots of data and the different forms of data. You have not just making decisions on clinical data that the patient gave you now, but on a very long medical history, on access to their genomics data as it becomes more and more accessible and affordable and mainstream, on their behavioral data. And while you have all this data, the progress AI is making, leapfrogging healthcare, is providing an opportunity to analyze this data in ways that wasn't possible before and do it at an affordable cost, at a feasible mannerism, and bring out insights that are consumable by the clinician. So once you have that capability, right, we're going to change the way we prescribe. We change the way we, I would say, first diagnose and then change the way we plan for treatment. It gets more and more personal, more and more targeted, and therefore change the way we prescribe. So it's going to change the way we deliver care and the kind of care that we deliver, right? And the combination of these two, I think, may set up like an infinite loop that can help us give us an opportunity, I would say, to improve the quality of care, the outcomes of healthcare, things that we've been trying to pursue for many decades now. That's one dimension. The other dimension that I see is because AI is going to allow us to do all of this in a highly scalable, repeatable manner. It's going to allow us to kind of democratize medical knowledge and expertise and be able to kind of take that from areas of high availability to areas of no availability. So, enabling access to expert care, expert knowledge. I wouldn't use the word care. Care will still need professionals to be delivered, but I'd say providing access to care professionals around the world, having them having access to knowledge and ability to make decisions and based on insights processed by knowledge systems at par with anywhere else in the world is a very powerful position to be in, and that would be our goal, to be able to kind of take this across the world and be able to kind of access this, empower clinicians around the world to provide quality of care that's never been delivered before.
Mm.
That's what I see happening.
Yeah, absolutely. That vision of more accessible and more equitable healthcare and generally a more healthier population. They're not, as you say, they're not new kind of ideas on what the where we're all striving to, but to be able to have that clarity around how we get there is super important. And utilizing artificial intelligence is going to play a big role there. I guess lastly, then, in your opinion, what do we need to do that? Like, what are the steps or what's required for us to actually get to that point? Because I get how these tools can potentially play a role, but sometimes without that clarity of like, well, this is what we need to do now, sometimes it can be difficult to see that progress. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think what AI in healthcare needs is, those aha moments, right? And that aha moment, I believe, is the point where we've got undeniable evidence on the safe use of AI in healthcare. And I don't paraphrase it as AI is safe in healthcare. I say, what's the best way to use healthcare, AI in healthcare, right? It's like X-rays. You X-rays are not safe inherently, right? But there's a safe way when you use them according to a particular protocol. They're infinitely helpful in medicine. They've changed the way. It was one of those moments in history of medicine that changed the way we practice, changed the way we diagnose, and definitely changed the outcomes of patients and outcomes for treatment, right? So I think we are with AI at that point where if we can uh, prove two things: one, the contours of its capabilities that should be used, that are safe to use in healthcare, and B, a system to be able to kind of verify that in your local setups. So it's very akin to saying we know what are the safe parameters of building the data and the evidence to prove safety and accuracy, completeness, acceptability around those in those dimensions, right? And then be able to kind of combine this with a system which puts a continuous evaluatory, I would say, system that is monitoring the AI if continuously at every point of performance, I would say. Now that could bring interesting. I'm getting in a system that I trust based on the data, and then I have a system that enables me to continue to monitor these trusts. It's the akin to having a quality audit that you have all the time, right? But more sparingly in healthcare. Here, imagine having that audit across every interaction that the AI system has with patients and patient data, right? So having these two systems in place would, and similar other concepts would allow us to kind of win the trust of physicians. So what I want to get to is, in order for any of this thing to happen, we need to still win the trust of clinicians, and we need to win the trust through performance, through data, and an ongoing system of change that we can measure, and outcomes that we can measure. If we can show consistently that use of AI has led not just to better clinical decisions, but has led to improved patient outcomes and care, we would be able to kind of scale AI to a point where it starts making a lot more meaningful sense, and allow us to scale, achieve our vision.
And that vision is indeed bold but inspiring, and but a pragmatic approach to it that you've outlined, Dr. Maaz. I appreciate you taking us through that, step by step, and providing some practical examples of how M42 is really enacting this today and into the future. So I really appreciate you making the time for this conversation, Dr. Maaz. Thank you so much.
Completely my pleasure, Peter.
And thank you for tuning in to Healthcare Matters. Make sure you're subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you can catch all the future episodes. This one is brought to you by Arab Health in partnership with M42. My name is Peter Birch. I'll see you next time.